Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this workshop. We have Michael Tsarion that will be giving you a whole focus on the destruction of Atlantis. And my name is Ruben Uriarte. I'm the State Director of Northern California MUFON. I'd like to welcome all of you. Michael will be focusing this workshop, as I mentioned earlier, the destruction of Atlantis. Was Atlantis really a center of advanced human civilization? What if Homo sapiens are not indigenous to Earth? Is the new order really something new? Why is the bloodline so crucial to the monarchs of the Earth? Who was Merlin? The Mahabharata in India. That's with the Spanish twist. The Trojan and Celtic wars were all going on relatively simultaneously. Who are the fallen angels that are spoken in the Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls? Michael will clarify once and for all who they are and how humanity has been affected. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Tsarion.
Thanks again for joining me for the second part of this presentation. And give me a minute, we'll connect with where we were in the previous one. No, it's fine, I turned it off. Well, I'm fishing through the files. Okay, I'd like to come to the synopsis so we can get to the matter of how much influence there has been in our society from these visitations and the coming of the gods. Like I said before, that more than 30,000 written documents from all over the world tell of advanced beings who either came to Earth or were already living on the Earth. This is from a good book called Past Shock by Jack Barringer. Now, the word Nephilim that's used in the Bible to describe these beings really means those who were cast down, not those who came down, okay? And sometimes they mistranslate that. It's those who were cast down. The difference of influence. In a book called the Srimad Bhagavatam of India, there's a quote that says, "It tells of a demon race which invaded the three planetary systems. Opposing the demons was the Hindu god Shiva, who possessed a powerful weapon that he fired at the enemy airships from his own." Now, it's interesting that the Mahabharata, the Veda, and the Bible, many of the references that, of course, spoke about this were just taken out. The Mahabharata, when Western scholars, even recently, like the 19th century, when they had to go through that book, or the Bhagavad Gita, and translate it into English, do you know that any time they came across a passage like this, they just left it out? They didn't even bother translating it because, of course, they knew what it would mean, it would represent. Then we turn to the Bible again. We have a statement that says, "They come from the far country, from the end of heaven, to destroy the whole land. Who are these that fly in a cloud as the doves to their windows?" Now, that's right. Who are these personages? I'd like to go into that right now with you and explain something of the background of our history that has been kept from us. It turns out that about 50,000 years ago, the Sumerian records always talk about 400,000 years ago. If you listen to Zechariah Sitchin when he's talking about the Anunnaki, and he's translated the ancient monuments there and the scripts and the cylinder seals, he tends to put the emphasis on 400,000 years ago, and I tend to have some problems with that, because it's not really corroborated by many of the other peoples and tribes and their writings. The Celtic peoples, the tendency is to believe it's about 50,000 years ago that our planet was actually visited by aliens. And the stories of the legends, when you research them enough and find out what was going on, you actually discover that a race of beings who had been expurged from their own planetary system somewhere else. Some people say Sirius, you know. Others are talking about the Pleiades. There's different philosophies. They had been expunged from their own system in an Armageddon that they had been having on their planet. and they left, and they were being pursued, and they were extremely advanced people. They're where our technology is, maybe even 1,000 years and more in advance. And these beings had space travel, and the stories talk about how they left their own planetary system, and they were being pursued, this adversarial power, you see. And it somehow says that they strayed into our solar system while they were being pursued, and they were ahead of their pursuers. And what they did was that they landed, or at least pretended to land, on another planet that used to be in our solar system. And we'll come to that. Now, we have information. Yeah. All down through society, as many other scholars and websites have gone into. Excuse me. About strange vehicles and visitations. Like in the book of Ezekiel, there's that famous quote that you've heard a lot. Now, as I looked upon the living creatures, I saw 4 wings upon the ground, one by each of them, of the living creatures, with their 4 faces, the appearance of wheels, and their composition was like the color of shiny amber. And all 4 wings had but one likeness, and their composition was like a wheel in the middle of a wheel. This is in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel, about a vision that this prophet is meant to have had. And we have artifacts from all over the world that bear incredible resemblance to modern-day spaceships. And I'm showing you this for a reason, because some of you have seen this stuff before on other websites, but I've got a particular interest to explain why there is the similarity. And spacemen and astronauts, because in a lot of the programs that deal with this, they do tell you they show you these things, but they never go into why. Have you ever noticed that after an hour-long, multi-million-dollar program, they still leave you with more questions? So we've got to realize that just displaying the facts and looking at the anomalies is one half of it, but then we need somebody to come along and give the answers, and that they will not do right now in mainstream media. Here we have again some sort of celestial scene, and with some what looks like crafts flying, you see. And then, of course, the temple at Abydos in Egypt. You have carvings on the walls that look like submarines and helicopters, very similar to what we have today. And many throughout the world, Vimana is a term that the Indians have used, Shem is a term that the Israelites have used. We have different visitation witnesses. Now, as these beings were entering into our solar system, they did land on a great planet that was in our solar system. It was called Tiamat by the ancients. Some people have also called that Lucifer, and others Luna, not connected to our moon. This was a gigantic planet that was mostly oceans, by the way, and it was its atmosphere was so luminescent that people called it the second sun. That's how it got the name Lucifer. In fact, another term that they often used was Phaeton, right? The Greeks called that planet Phaeton. And it wasn't a sun, but it was a planet that its certain, whatever atmosphere it had, whenever the sunlight was, beaming on it, it has great radiance. And all down through society you'll hear in the ancient legends the terminology that relates to the second sun or the second orb in our solar system. And these beings that entered into our solar system made it appear, or that they had landed on this planet. They even set up a dummy base to send pulsations, electromagnetic pulsations out. And when their pursuers arrived into our solar system, they detected this and basically thought that their adversary was on this planet of Tiamat, and guess what they did to it? They completely incinerated the entire planet of this Tiamat. And in many works, there's references to this. They say this planet split in half. One part just plunged into the sun. Another part became our moon. Some people even say part of Tiamat became the Earth. But that's not really true. So this entire planet was destroyed, and all of its content is up there now as what we call the asteroid belt. Exactly. And Charles Fort, who's an American suppressed writer, not too well known by people, made a life study of all these things that have to do with anomalies like fallen ice, these huge chunks of ice, and frozen fish, and all sorts of strange things that fall from the sky. It's never been properly explained, and they thought he was a crank. The point is that they're not coming from our planet. Sometimes when our orbit of our planet, has times when it comes very close to the asteroid belt and the debris that's up there from this lost planet. And when it does, the magnetic attraction of the Roche field brings some of this content through into our atmosphere again. And that's why even live fish can fall. Because I'm talking about this destruction of this planet probably happened about 50,000 years ago. And it was an ocean planet. Tiamat was an ocean planet, so most of that is ice, as most of the asteroid belt is ice. Those are frozen oceans. And even its contents will fall to our Earth live thousands of years later because of the nature of the refrigeration. And then it's reactivated by our Earth atmosphere. And every time this stuff happens, and people all over the world have seen this happen in front of them, and it's never been properly explained. So, these beings actually did not go to Tiamat. They actually landed on our planet, which was mostly covered in forest at that time. And it was 5 different continents, not what we know today. And they went into the tunnels that people like Eric von Daniken, have discovered and amazed at how these tunnels could be cut. And some say that they even went under the oceans. Like in Samuel here it says, "And the king said to her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth." In Bulwer Lytton, his book The Coming Race, he says he describes the existence of a utopian society of advanced beings who live in tunnels and caverns beneath the surface of the earth in a land called the Vrilya. These beings, known as the Ana, were forced into the inner earth because of earth changes, specifically a flood which destroyed their civilizations. Okay? So again, information about Hollow Earth. And by the way, Hollow Earth is a fascinating subject if ever there was one. This is Admiral Byrd, you may have heard of, who flew across the North Pole and discovered that there was these caverns that, again, are not on any physical maps. For those who don't know about this, they should check into the concept of Hollow Earth. In the book of Job, it says, "Dead things are formed from under the water, and the inhabitants thereof." And then when you look to the comment about this, it says, "The place where the Rephaim stay, which is beneath the waters." Dead things in Hebrew is Rephaim, the offspring of the fallen angels, akin to the Nephilim. But again, just for now, let's notice that they're talking about living under the waters. The Celtic legends speak of exactly the same thing. How that when the gods, the negative beings, come to attack the gods, they come from under the ocean. That's another thing that people just throw across the room and go, "What is this nonsense?" When they read it in a legend. They don't take it seriously. Now these beings came to our planet, and after they knew that their pursuers had basically gone, they emerged out onto the surface of the earth and set up their headquarters on the continent of Appalachia, and the headquarters was called Atlantis. Atlantis is not a continent. This is another piece of disinformation that's been brought out. There was 5 gigantic continents in those days: Tyrrhenia, Beringia, Oceania, Fennoscandia, and Appalachia. And Appalachia was in the north. It's where, North America, Alaska is, or where the Arctic is now, right across past Greenland, Iceland, into where north up of England, and then into Sweden and into Siberia. That whole area, but specifically the part between, say, Greenland and England. This is where Atlantis was, on a gigantic continent. You could walk the whole way. And the headquarters of these alien beings is what we've come to call Atlantis. And when they set up this advanced, they had all their technology with them, spacecrafts and all sorts of super technologies. Remember Superman, the movie? How when they watch Superman, when he goes up to his, his oracle or his tabernacle, his temple, don't they show him going north, up into the Arctic, into the snows, and then he goes into his precinct and it's all like a crystalline computer? Do you remember that? Superman from another planet? Yeah, somebody's trying to tell us things there. Anyway, these beings started to interact with us. Now, our planet, in the 65 million years or whatever we've been on this planet, Homo sapien has been on this planet as hunter-gatherers, we probably have been visited enormous amount of times by cousins and brothers from other solar systems. But the policy of most of those groups has always been to come here, do your research, but not to interfere in the actual destiny of the indigenous peoples, the Homo sapiens, and the Neanderthals, and the Angus people that were on this planet. Not to involve yourself, and if possible, not even to be seen. Okay? But these beings who came here were what you would call in Milton the fallen angels, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And they had an agenda that did want to interfere with the Homo sapien at that time. So they started to corral, and they started to research all of the life forms and all of the peoples of the earth at that time. And they started to corral, just like in the movie Planet of the Apes, they show this. They started to corral the people onto this place of Atlantis and started to check into their entire biology. And then at a certain point, thousands of years later, not immediately, because it takes time to set up all of these things, genetic changes were done. And the result being that almost all the original Homo sapiens were either changed, and those who weren't changed were killed or created into slaves and subsequently faded out. And the being that they created, we might want to term Homo Atlantis. A being that has pure alien DNA and has pure human DNA. Okay? Homo Atlantis, from which we are all descended. But the euphemism, or the poetic euphemism for these people, is called the sons of the serpent. Because, like I said, the original people were called the brotherhood of the snake, or the serpent people. Not because they look like serpents, and we'll come to why they really were called the serpents in a minute. But their first progeny was called the sons of the serpent. And that's why we have in the Bible the term, it says, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Right? They're telling you all about this in the book of Genesis. And by the way, does anybody know that the word Genesis even means the genes of the goddess Isis? Or the generation of Isis? Implying something? And in fact, the Bible, when it uses the word created, it's actually a mistranslation of a word that is actually more like our word build or construct. You know? So this is what we also have the term the firstborn. In the Bible, what we have to understand, because also, think of it, why would the angel of death or God, like even in Herod, you know, and later on before in the Pharaoh's time, what would be the importance of going and killing the firstborn of your enemies? Sure, wouldn't it be smarter to go and kill your enemy and have done with it? Why are you going to wait to kill all his firstborns? See? And secondly, no such atrocity happened. There's never any record of any massacre of any innocents or anything like that in physical record at all. So the firstborn is another one of these cryptic terms, and it's a reference to the sons of the serpent race, also known as the children of the Elohim. Some people might want to call the original serpent masters the Jehovah clan, the term that's spoken of in the Bible, and others might want to call the first group, their firstborn, the Elohim. Now, Christians will not understand this. What are you talking about? There is a rule of thumb that you can use in the Bible to make things a lot easier, and that is whenever you're hearing a term like that, especially Adam and Eve and Jehovah and Elohim, try to think less of an individual and more as a race. Okay, a group of people at least. And then things will start to be clear. Now they created this firstborn to serve them. And they did it by genetically changing the human and alien DNA together at the place we call Atlantis. But as time went by, maybe hundreds of years, nobody knows exactly the dates. The original visitation, of course, was what? 50,000 years ago. And we have, from that time, a great deluge. Remember when the planet Tiamat was destroyed, it said as debris fell into the earth and created enormous cataclysms. But it didn't create a pole shift, it just created enormous cataclysms that changed the face of the earth forever. But at least that kind of contamination slowly did subside over time. It was devastating, and many, many people died, and lots of changes in the land. But it was not so awesome, you see, that over a few hundred years, a certain amount of normalcy did not come back. Because the earth has been visited by that kind of trouble many, many times. But anyway, when they created this firstborn, they sent the firstborn out to be their servants, to actually go out into the Garden of Eden, into Atlantis, Appalachia, and their territories that they were conquering, and do their physical work for them. But after a certain period of time, these sons of the serpent had the human DNA. And therefore they had the humanity, the humanism, and the sense of spiritual connectedness to things, that sensibility that their own fathers didn't have. And it dawned on these sons of the serpent that finally they realized, to cut a long story short, that they didn't want to serve these masters anymore, because they probably didn't agree with them and didn't like doing this and didn't feel that they should be subservient. And it's interesting too, because they had the high intelligence and the divine spiritual connection. So they left. They actually upped and left as a race. Probably not all of them, but whatever the group of these sons of the serpent, they actually exited out of Appalachia, out of Atlantis, and resituated their own civilization on the continent of Oceania, which we now call Lemuria, which is estimated to be where the Pacific is, you see. And they completely left, just exited out, leaving their alien fathers with a predicament of what to do. So what they did is they went back to the drawing board again to create another entity. It says, let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. What shall we do to be invoked? To be remembered in earth. We have tried with our first creatures. Look at this. But we could not make them venerate us. So then let us try to make obedient, respectful beings who shall nourish and sustain us. This is from a Mexican book, the Popol Vuh. Do you know the conquistadors, how many books they burned? You want to know why? If this is one little piece of one little book, right? Think what those books really contained, and now find out why they were burned. The first creatures wouldn't do it, so we go to the second. Genesis, by the sweat of thy face will be thy bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust thou art, and to dust thou wilt return. Does that sound like God talking to somebody? Or is it more of human politics? And the Lord said, Behold, the man has become one of us, to know good and evil, and now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Now, the interesting thing is that they did create another being, and that being they called the Adamic race, or we refer to now as the Adam. But again, not an individual. The Adams and Eves were created, but they were called the Adamic race. And they had to think, when they created the second generation offspring, they thought to themselves, what did we do the first time that was wrong? What we did the first time it was wrong is we gave the power to our first sons, the firstborn, the intellectual abilities and genius that we ourselves possess. And that's why they got all arrogant and took off. So the next time we make a group, our servants, we will literally dumb them down. We will close off the centers of the high intelligences that we have, the technological intelligences and so on. And, I mean, you can do that in a laboratory, a behaviorist laboratory now, just using the brain synapses. But they were doing it on a DNA level. So that's exactly what they did. They created a being whose intelligence level would be much more suppressed, and that was the Adamic race, and they sent them out to be the servants. And they had a feminine counterpart that could not at that time breed through mating, but they were feminine. The female versions. And the Lord said, Look, the people are united, and they all have one language. Come on, let us go down, and therefore confound their language so that they cannot understand one another's speech. Now, as I said, in the Bible, you'll hear certain terms, and you'll hear this term naked, that Adam and Eve went into the garden naked. Well, what does that mean? That God was wearing Levi jeans then, and everybody had clothes? The word naked is another, euphemism, a cryptic euphemism in the Bible that refers to a state of being in intellectual ignorance, nakedness, into the garden in a naked state, meaning that they had suppressed intelligence. But reduced intelligence of what, specifically? Remember how I just quoted those books where it says they cannot eat off the tree of life? Remember that? Well, the forbidden fruit, this term, the forbidden fruit of the tree of life, is another euphemism for the knowledge of human genetics. Because the tree of life symbol has always been the symbol for that. For what we call the caduceus of Hermes, or the DNA spiral. In ancient times it was known as the caduceus of Hermes, or before that, the tree of life, because that's exactly what it is. And they said it has its roots in the earth and its branches in heaven. And then later, that tree became known as the tree of good and evil. And all the people who think they're into the occultism go, the tree of good and evil, thinking that means something esoteric. Actually, it doesn't. This term does not refer to anything esoteric. It refers only to the two contingents, or races and residents on this planet, both custodians and utilizers of the knowledge of genetics. The good and the evil, for want of a better term. It's their tree, meaning their knowledge. So naked and not being able to eat off the tree of life, not being able to eat off the fruit of the tree of life, is a euphemism for the Adamic race not having the intellectual ability that their masters had, the high scientific, technical knowledge of reproduction on that level, and the science of biology and technology. And that's what these symbols all refer to. Do you know in the Kabbalistic tree of life, anybody familiar with this? There are 22 paths. 22? Anybody in the genetics know the number 22 and the chromosomes on the DNA? So when we read about the forbidden fruit, we got to ask ourselves a question. This symbol is even styrated in the symbols of the chakras, or an analog to that, right? The forbidden fruit relates to genetics. If it doesn't, why is a technical company that expressly involves itself in technology having the same symbol from the book of Revelation? And they're not the only corporation to do this. There's many others. So back to like when we did in the first presentation, this concept of the serpent in the garden that has at least come down to us through the Bible. This concept of Adam and Eve being visited by a serpent. Now the interesting thing is that as this Adamic race was slaving away with no trade unions and no extra time and anything like that, overtime, working for their hidden masters, these Atlanteans, this became known to the sons of the serpent who were living on Lemuria. because they were probably keeping tabs, watching what their forefathers were doing. And they then had this predicament, didn't they? Because they said, look, we got free from these masters. We're doing all right over here with our high civilization and great culture. But they've created a second race, but they've used also the human DNA. So in a way, aren't they our cousins? Right? Aren't the Adamic race now cousins to us? But they're in a dumbed down state. So they said, we're in a bit of a predicament. What would happen if we went back in surreptitiously to Eden, into Atlantis, and told them that, and tried to get them to come with us? And that is exactly what happened. The serpent entered into the garden and discoursed with the Adamic race. But the stories of the ancient legends say that the Adams, the male ones, didn't kind of get it. It didn't make too much sense to them. But the Eves really got into it. Right? And they were very responsive to what the sons of the serpent were saying. And so would you, because they said that they were comely and attractive, had magical powers, tremendous intellect, but a divine spiritual ray, right, of great wisdom. And they came into the daughters and they talked to them, and the daughters of Eve said, hey, this looks like a good deal, let's get going, pack up. And they dragged the Adams with them. I've had some women say, why did they even bother doing that? But you know how things are, right? So anyway, a lot of them did leave. To cut a long story short, because the Eves understood this concept, somehow they started to exit. Again, maybe not all, right? But enough of a large contingency exited with the sons of the serpent. And the sons of the serpent said to them, know ye not your gods? What we can do, you can do also and more. So the coming of the serpent into the garden has been completely put before us opposite than what it was, for good reason, and it doesn't make any sense. But the fact that it hasn't made any sense doesn't seem to bother anyone. Right? Because women are suppressed, they hold no office, everything works. But the very fact of the tree and the serpent, like I said before, goes back to the whole concept of Egypt and the mysteries of what? This very symbol of the tree and the serpent is your DNA, and the initiation back into that knowledge that was sequestered from you. And isn't it interesting, scientists will not like this one, isn't it interesting that women were the ones who took to that knowledge first? Isn't it always been that science was a male patriarchal thing that's been put before us? Science and the matriarchy are very connected. There's a long story about how science and the rise of science in the world is connected to the female matriarchal system that's been not covered a lot in our societies. Now, because the females, one more anecdote about this, is because the Eves were originally the most receptive to their teachers, the sons of the serpent teachers, that was never forgotten by the sons of the serpent. And later when they got to Lemuria, the Eves were given positions of superiority. They were what was called the beloved. And that is where we get the priestess classes and the matriarchal powers coming from. The fact that women were keepers of the secrets, initiators, right, and mystics, where we get this from comes from Lemuria and the connection to Oceana and the sons of the serpent. That initiating power. Because it was never forgotten that they were the beloved ones. You know in the Bible when it talks about Mary Magdalene being the harlot? That word harlot is a mistranslation of a word called herodulai. Herodulai, I think in Greek. And you know what herodulai means? Sacred or beloved one. Right? And Jesus, right, was meant to be the immaculate child, right? What's this connection again and we find in the Bible? By the way, the Egyptian hieroglyphic for woman was, guess what? A serpent. Then Madame Helena Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society said something, because she was on the ball with all of this. The appellation Satan in Hebrew and adversary belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not in the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. See that? What she's been saying in her books? Now also, when you read this term, born of a virgin, since we're talking about the Bible, we have to understand that this word immaculate conception is another covered term for genetic conception, meaning without sexuality. This is a euphemism for conception between a woman and a member of the serpent race. Remember I said that the females couldn't conceive sexually? When they went to Lemuria, that was changed. The sons of the serpent, realizing that the Adams and Eves should have congress together, changed the DNA of the female so that they could mate. But certain times there was specific women that the sons of the serpent themselves would connect with. And any time that ever happened, that woman was always known as the Virgin Queen, right, or the Virgin, when she was not with one of the Adamic race, but with one of the sons of the serpent race. And should there be offspring from that being was always called the Immaculately Conceived. Right. So Jesus Christ, Alexander the Great, everybody in the ancient times were saying they were that. Maybe a lot of them were. So just bear that in mind, that when you hear these covered terms, immaculate conception, it means some form of DNA or genetic conception, or at least a connection of congress between one of the races who would have known this. Now we see motifs of this turning up all over the place. Like I said, because of time constraints we don't have time. I just have one picture for you. Based on what we've been saying, just look at this famous logo. You notice how this is a woman that looks very much like a clone? See that? A cloned girl. Then you have what? Look at this. A huge red serpent, right? A dragon. You have a tree beside her, right? And then you have a black heart. And then you have the term of the company, it's Virgin Atlantic. Atlantic comes from where? The Virgins of Atlantis. Find out who Richard Branson really is, and who he really works for. These rags to riches tales have been put in front of us. I mean, we've got to start seeing through a lot of this stuff. Talking about the Bible, blood and seed is, again, anytime that you hear the blood of Abraham or Jacob's seed, you know, just replace it with this word and things will start to make sense. Right? These terms are used a lot. The seed of Job, you know, and all of this. And what's going to happen to the seed of Israel and all of these things. These are cover terms for something else. In fact, you have this prohibition in the Bible, thou shalt not lie with the beasts. That does not relate to actual bestiality, because what the hell, what's that, right? But to congress with the serpents. But see how much sense it makes now? Right? The beast, this is a cover word. Thou shalt not lie with the beasts. Thou shalt not lie with the serpents. In the Bible. They don't like that. Of course not. Remember when Moses came in front of God at the burning bush and he said, who are you? And God said, I am the God of thy fathers. And that's never been properly explained. How can God of whose fathers? His fathers? It's another meaning. Yes, God of your fathers, all right. The sons of the serpent were the fathers of the high earth cultures. But their so-called their fathers referred to here were the alien masters of Atlantis, later in situ in the Middle East. So when God Jehovah is relating to Moses saying, I'm the God of thy fathers, understand what he was talking about there. Circumcision, another wonderful invention of our modern age. When the foreskin is removed, the foreskin is the remnant, is it not, of the real proto-human DNA. The ritual of its removal is therefore, is said to be a divine edict, was to dehumanize and align one with the gods. It is the mark of our servitude. Because obviously a man needs a foreskin, right? Homo sapien had probably had it. Don't you see then what the removal of it means? It's a ritual. To take away, to literally say, we remove the real, it's a symbol, but that was a specific symbol. And taking it away realigns you with the alien DNA and the genetic concept. To remind you that this is the mark of your servitude, that you serve the serpents. That's why you get it done in a hospital. That's why it's done under the caduceus. So Commons Beaumont, one of the great writers on this subject, a genius. For God's sake, this man, I don't understand how his works are not the rave all over the world. They're so suppressed. He said the history of the Old Testament is the history of Atlantis. So, now these serpent masters suddenly find out that this is the third time that their plans have gone awry. First, they're kicked out of their own planet, right? They have to travel across space, come to this useless planet they probably don't even like. They create a race of servants to serve them who won't serve them. They create a third race who will serve them, and then they're lured away by the first race. So they're really pissed now. In fact, they really are pissed, because it says, by Jack Barringer, in one of the most tragic ironies, the majority of humans continue to worship those gods who have abused them the most. Is that not true? Ezekiel says, wherefore as I live, saith the Lord God, surely because thou hast defiled my sanctuary with all of thy detestable things, and with all thine abominations, therefore will I also diminish thee. Neither shall mine eye spare thee, neither shall I have any pity. These comments about the wrath of Jehovah have a specific reference. Then shall ye know that I am the Lord. Do you know, somebody asked, I think it was Carl Jung, why Jehovah always talks about I all the time? You know, he's overemphasizing his power, his wrath, that he'll get angry. Well, you only do that if there's an opposing side that you're trying to compete against, wouldn't it? So he says, I am the Lord, when, and you'll know this, he says, when their slain men shall be among their idols, round and about their altars, upon every high hill, in all the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every thick oak, the place where they did offer sweet savour to all their idols, so will I stretch out my hand upon them, and make the land desolate, for they shall know that I am the Lord. Now you see now from what we're saying why something like this, the caption would be written? Because the alien masters now wanted the Adamic race to know who the real God was. And that it says here that they would even slay the bodies amongst their idols. Idols meaning, you know, that the idols will have to watch these people die. So I will send upon you famine and evil beasts, and they shall bereave thee, and pestilence and blood shall pass through thee, and I will bring the sword upon thee. I, the Lord, have spoken it. It's all from the Bible. Job 14, he shall flee from the iron weapon, and the bow shall strike him through. From Ovid, the poet, who wrote Metamorphoses, giants attacked the very throne of heaven, Jove struck them down. In the Mahabharata, it was as if the elements had been unleashed. The sun spun round, scorched by the heat of the weapon. The world reeled in fever. Thousands of chariots were burned up. The corpses no longer looked like human beings. Because, ladies and gentlemen, what happened was they were very angry. And they unleashed a huge war with thermonuclear devices against Lemuria. But the Lemurians, the sons of the serpent, weren't sleeping in. They knew this would happen, and they retaliated as well. And that was what we call the first war of the gods that took place on this planet around 12,000 years ago. And all of these terms come out are speaking about that. Look what they're saying there. Scorched by the heat of the weapon. This is a book thousands of years old, right? Thousands of chariots were burned up. What are we reading here? And in Jeremiah, all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger. Remember that one? Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants. O my people that dwellest in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with a rod, and shall lift up his staff against thee, after the manner of Egypt. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hands is mine indignation. The rod and the staff are weapons. Thomas Beaumont proved that the wands that the ancients held, right, and this emphasis on the rod and the staff are actually weapons of a kind. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman and every free man hid themselves in the dens of the rocks of the mountains, for fear of what was going on. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Ephesians. Now look at this one. Woe unto us, woe, who shall deliver us out of the land of these almighty gods? Now they're asking for deliverance for the gods. I mean, one minute they're nice, one minute they're not. We even have a quote here where you're wanting delivery from the gods, plural. These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all manner of plagues in the wilderness. Plural, the gods. Different people writing, sure, maybe even different times, but they're relating to something that happened. The terminology talks about that. In the book of Job, Ignatius Donnelly, another one of your American masters on Atlantis, it sounds like a cry not of a man, but of a race. See that? He got that. Remember I was telling you that? Think of not an individual, but a race. Donnelly was already on the ball. In the 19th century, he was a friend of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln agreed to give Donnelly the rights to send out the Challenger, which was one of your Navy vessels, to do depth soundings for Atlantis. Within 1 month of him giving him that rights, Lincoln was dead. So Donnelly didn't get the budget to actually, in those days they were so interested in Atlantis, and Lincoln was very interested in this, and gave him all the rights, and they said that whatever you want, all the depth charges will be sent, and we'll take readings from the earth, from the bottom of the Atlantic. But Lincoln was assassinated, and Donnelly's plan fell through. But he's written several books, they're on my book list, you need to get them. And he's saying this, it sounds like a cry, not of a man, but of a race, a great religious, civilized race who could not understand how God had so cruelly visited the world. Absolutely right. Look at this. Frederick Soddy is one of the greatest scientists, modern scientists. in his book Interpretation of Radium, right, this physicist says, "Can we not read in these books some justification for the belief that some forgotten race of men attained not only the knowledge that we have so recently won, but also that a power that is not yet ours? I believe that there have been civilizations in the past that were familiar with atomic energy, and that by misusing it, they were totally destroyed." So isn't that some crank saying this? In the Ramayana, another sacred book of India, it mentions an iron thunderbolt capable of killing hundreds of thousands of humans. It was also said to be so powerful that it could have destroyed the earth. These weapons could only be used by, look at this, royal decree. There is even passages where it mentions the fact that the weapon was used as retaliation for the other side using it first. Doesn't that sound familiar? In the Smagargana Sutrahara, it says, there is mention of manned space rockets as well as their means of propulsion. We have radioactive isotopes in Sodom and Gomorrah, where they found the area where they think the Sodom and Gomorrah thing took place. It's rich in radioactive isotopes. And that term, when the angel says to Lot's wife, "Do not turn back, because you'll be turned into a pillar of salt," mistranslation. The translation of the word salt is more like our English word for vapor. You'll be turned into a vapor. You'll be vaporized. Because the wrath of the Lord is coming to this place. Well, they've gone there now and they found nothing but radioactivity all over the place. Our word typhoon for a great, wind or terrible power of destruction actually comes from the word for the devil, typhon, which also means serpent. Hurricane actually means the same thing. Cane meaning serpent, hurry means the shaking of the serpent. So we even use the terms today implying some sort of beast or serpent. The reason is because originally the serpents did have a war on this planet. And that is why the ancient Gaelic people talk about the wars of the gods, where the sons of light, the sons of the serpent, had to fight these beasts, these demonic serpent people, for the knowledge. And how they had to conjure with magic and fight these demonic forces and keep them in abeyance. It's all been in the legends of Ireland. And how eventually those beings, in concert, destroyed the earth. Remember we talked about the fact that Tiamat, the first deluge, was created by the destruction of Tiamat? Do you know that the word disaster, another word we use when we talk about some calamity, actually means no star? Aster and dis without. The word catastrophe, right, actually means destruction of a star. Kata, to be breaking down, kata, to destroy or break down the stars. So when we even talk about a travesty of any kind, we're saying no star or destruction of a star, because it's not some small event when Tiamat, one of the planets in your system that looks like a sun, just explodes 50,000 years ago. I think we're going to remember that, Remember in Star Wars, when Luke Skywalker, after he notices that his parents have been killed, he walks out onto the plains of the desert and he looks up, and in the background, what does Spielberg show in the night sky there, or the day sky? Is two planetoids, two suns, two symbols. They use this a lot in mythologies. Now, you see, what happened was that the ferocity of this battle between the gods had tremendous ferocity and totally is recorded in these legends as being devastating. No matter where you go, all the texts. And remember when we said that after the destruction, or even the first deluge, when these beings came here, they came to a foreign planet, remember. The planet's size may be different. Its ultraviolet rays, the Schumann waves, may be different. They may be in a part of the galactic center that they don't know where they are, the galactic wing. The stars look different. They're really trapped. They have the ability to get off the planet, but they don't know where they are. So originally monuments were created. When they set up Atlantis here, these monuments began to be created for one specific reason. What do you do when you're lost? Right? You need to find a compass, right? Or a map. They're lost in the galaxy. So they started creating what we now know as the Great Earth Circles, these monuments in ancient sites, so that they could find out where they were, because that takes a long time. You're dealing with astrophysics and astronomy. They're very looking at the motion of the sun during the year. You know, when they saw the sun? Just to find out what the cycle of the sun is would take them a whole year of daily observations. So they built these rocks and stone, these monuments, to map out exactly what the cycles are on this new planet that they're in. That's why there's so many of them. And plus they had plenty of slaves to do it, to haul those rocks, and they had magical powers and spacecrafts to carry them in. So they put these things together. To them it was easy. And then they would have their shamans, what we now know as the priests, their priests, sitting in and making these astronomical calculations for the navigation that was coming for that purpose, to know what area they were in. And that's why a lot of these buildings were built. Some were built before. Now, don't you understand? Somebody will go, okay, but then how come they're still standing? Because now you're saying there was a deluge, right? Well, let's take the pyramid and the Sphinx as a perfect answer to that. Obviously, the pyramid was built after the deluge, but anyone know the latest research on the Sphinx? They were talking about all the water damage that it seems to have had. Yeah, you familiar with that? That's right, because that was what? That was built before. And that's going to go for all the countries. Some are totally ruined and devastated because they were built before, others came afterwards. And that's why these were done, for markings, alignments, to find out where the stars are rising, what constellations, what's going on. It's just a simple thing that you would do. Now, it turns out that when the Adamic race was seduced away, one interesting anecdote is that they did not stop wanting servants, the original masters. They went back to the drawing boards for a fourth time. And this time they really thought about what they had done wrong. Why is this always happening to them? Why they can't just have their servants, their slaves, to do what they want on this earth. And they discovered that, look, I think the fundamental problem was we've been crossing our DNA with the humanoids on this planet, right? But there's lots of other creatures on this planet, other fauna. So they start making researches into the other fauna on this planet, screening and checking into their DNA and their blood and all of the rest of it. And to cut a long story short, and they did this without, if you read J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings with educated eyes, you're going to read something amazing in there. They did this with a lot of different animals for different purposes. That's where we get our unicorn, our minotaur, all the centaur creatures coming out of. That's what they were doing. And they were alive right down to even the Middle Ages. But they found that what we call the Earth reptile had specifically good DNA for them to cross with. And they did. And they created what we know to be the reptilians. So again, ladies and gentlemen, when you're hearing about the reptilians visited our planet, the reptilians are coming, disinformation or just lack of research. We were not invaded by any reptilians. The reptilians are created on the planet Earth by the visitors. They are not the visitors. They are a group that was created by them later on. And the reptile is cold-blooded, right? Have you ever noticed that you can steal the children of a reptile mother right in front of her and she just stares right into space? You've heard the term cold-blooded, right? So when they crossed this, then they had the perfect servant. A being that was very powerful, very strong, and no conscience whatsoever. And these reptilians were their servants for a long, long time. And now some of them did look very reptilian, by the way. This does happen, that when they created this fourth race, some of them would look very, very reptilian in their eyes and their hands. But again, because they were using humanoid DNA, aliens look humanoid, a lot of them look very, very humanoid. In fact, you could be standing beside one today and not know it. The ones who look more reptilian, right, they're gone. They're underground now. Well, in fact, they were phased out. Around about the Middle Ages, they were still around. That's where you get all the stuff about the knights and the heroes going to have to fight with some demon knocking on the door and having to fight a dragon or something like that. Yeah, because these characters are still around. Mythologies are full of it. But as the industrial age came up, you can't have these characters walking the streets. So, right, so they phased them out. But the ones that look, and they're still born, some of them, but the humanoid ones, you could be standing right beside them and wouldn't know it unless your intuition tells you there's ways, as psychics and people like that will tell you. And as it says in Clement, and on earth shall be monsters, a generation of dragons of men, and likewise of serpents. From another famous writer. Now let's conclude by looking at the post-Diluvian epoch, see if we can get through a little bit of this. Obviously, we're not 11,000 years ago anymore, are we? We're talking about this in the 21st century. So, if there indeed was a war of the gods, if I'm telling you truth, if the evil came into humankind due to this genetic manipulation, and I got more to say about that, it's just, we have such a short period of time about all the euphemisms in the Bible and what have you. But if in fact this did happen, why is it that neither side seems to have then triumphed? It's over, 50,000 years later since they arrived here, and certainly 12,000 years ago since they got into the War of the Gods. I just wanted to sketch the background and show you how many texts actually talk about the War of the Gods, because if I was just telling you it, you wouldn't get it. It's there. It's in the records. But why are we 1,000 years later still talking about this? If evil had triumphed, right, the serpent masters of God, we'd all have no problem. We'd all be slaves, working in mines, and no worries, right? Completely over and done with. Evil would be all over the world. And if the good side had won, well, then we'd all be living in peace and harmony, wouldn't we? In a paradisical civilization. Neither of which are true. We have the schizophrenia I was talking about earlier. Each one of us have it inside. And it's collective and it's political and it's found in every corner of the globe. Well, this is because of an unforeseen variable. And that is what it is. When this thermonuclear war that probably involved even weapons we don't know about, and a lot of psychic stuff, when you read the Celtic legends, they're talking about a lot of stuff coming even out of the mind in magical wars. But with an emphasis on technology, on hardware, don't doubt that. An unforeseen variable occurred. The violence of these people awoken the violence of the earth. Remember the first deluge I told you was an atrocity? It's mentioned in all the records of how the animals and people died. But it did subside after a while. It changed the earth. But it subsided after a few hundred years. This violence, they say that the radiation from the weapons incinerated the entire atmosphere. All the moisture in the atmosphere was totally irradiated. And this affected the magnetic aura of the earth and the Roche limit. And the earth careered off of its axis and went into what we call the pole shift situation. And then when it shifted its pole, Mars was affected, right? And all the other planets spun out of control, which they still look like they have an influence from this. But what happened even more importantly? The Roche field sent out its magnetic powers, right? Its magnetic energy, and the Van Allen belt, the asteroid belt that we talked about earlier on. Now it's sucked back all that debris from the lost planet of Tiamat, and all the ice and all the water, and all of that planet's debris, trillions of tons of this stuff. I've got in my book there and on this website endless quotes from legends, exactly specifically talking about this. We just don't have time to show them all, but it's all in the manuscript. This stuff poured into the earth, and that's why they talk about the 40 days of rain, how the earth stood still in the sky and man couldn't see even his brother's face and all of that. But this deluge of water fell in now with a vengeance, and it was so powerful that it created unbelievable devastation. The pole shift we're talking about here. Studies have shown that at 10,000 years BC, the celestial pole was inclined at the angle of 30 degrees from its present position. This is, in turn, strongly suggests that the terrestrial axis then orientated differently from today. The gigantic worldwide tectonic disturbances of the late Pleistocene times occurred almost simultaneously on a near unimaginable scale, I should say, precisely what could be expected from a powerful external influence, but not from the Ice Age conditions conventionally believed. This is from a book you all should get called When the Earth Nearly Died. I have it abstracted in my dossier, so don't worry about it. Then the Tahoe, not far from here, the Tahoe Indians are saying, there was a time when their tribe possessed the whole earth and were strong and numerous and rich. But a day came when a people rose up stronger than they and defeated and enslaved them. Afterward, the Great Spirit sent an immense wave across the continent from the sea, and this wave engulfed both the oppressors, look at that last line, both the oppressors and the oppressed, leaving only a very small remnant. Very suggestive that. Plato says, in one day and one fatal night, there came the mighty earthquakes and inundations that engulfed that warlike peoples. Look at this references. That debris that fell in from Tiamat, plus the earth change, the earth pole shift, that is what sank those 5 or 4 continents I've been telling you about. Our planet had hardly any water on it at all. It only had what was called the Miocene Ocean, which is where the Baltic is now. You know where the Dead Sea and Caspian Sea, most of Russia, was an ocean, granted. And there's probably some other water here and there. All these scholars are still wondering how the Indians got over to there and how the Egyptians got over to South America. There was no bloody water, so all you had to do was walk. Right? But I tell you, when those continents, Appalachia, Tyrrhenia, Oceania, Beringia, Fennoscandia, when that debris fell in, that is what put these continents thousands and thousands of fathoms under the oceans that we have today. You know the fear of water that some people have, the fear of oceans? It's for a reason. Those ain't even our waters. When you look at the ocean, you're looking at Tiamat. What was left of it. John, the Bible. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. See? The reference is to no more water, or water, and the fact that the earth was born again as the ocean subsided from the next continents, implying that the seawater covered everything at one time. And yeah, our human fears and phobias. Fear of darkness, caves and hollow places, of water, of heights, of loneliness, of insects and certain animals, enclosed spaces, foreigners. You know, the psychologist is going to say, well, you know, that's just the way the mind is. We have psychological fears. Hey, what would happen if those are physiological, racial memories? See, again, I don't believe that nature and the human mind is that, is that messed up, right? So that, slip into my Irish a bit, that does this to us. We're not plagued by just, you know, psychological Freudian problems for no reason. There's research now that proves that this is physiological. Well, look, if it only happened 50,000 years ago, that's a dot in time. You know, in the phylological timeline, the phylogenetic timeline, that is an extremely short period of time. When you're cowering, when your forefathers are cowering in caves, watching the universe be destroyed around them, I think you're going to remember that. So when you see certain insects or see water or have dreams, right, etc., 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 it's right there in the back of your consciousness. But when we've talked about it, the leaders put it down. Oh, well, you know, let's get Freud out, or let's get somebody, wheel them out and give an explanation for this. They'll do anything. Even if it doesn't hold water, any of these philosophies or truths, they'll do it anyway because they just don't want you to look at what it really might be. Julian Jaynes, an amazing author, American, author of The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, another book that's a must. He claimed that this period, thousands of years ago, was a time of intense psychosis for the emerging human race. Okay, so it's physiological. Remembrance in our minds. But what was the variable? The variable was the destruction of the earth. But in that destruction of the earth, think of how it would have affected those people. Right? Millions of the serpent race would have been destroyed. Not millions of them. Millions of our earth people. Say there was about 2,000 original alien visitors. Just let's take a number, right? How many do you think of those people were left? Probably 50. Of maybe several thousand sons of the serpent people, maybe only 2,000 of them were left. How many were left of the Adamic entourage that they took with them? Who knows? But what was much, 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 much more a greater loss to these aliens was in this war and the earth changes and the deluge, they lost their technological hardware. You know, they were still digging it up, you know. And then they sequester it, just like they show you in Indiana Jones. They're calling them children's toys and what have you. You know, it's all buried under there. But they lost it. And now, they were trapped. Maybe they had a couple of devices and so on, and they had it all in here, but in here is no good to a technologically advanced race. Remember, their whole thing was that they were technologically advanced. When the Earth did this, it destroyed all their hardware, or most of their hardware. All the computers, all the supercomputers, all the technologies that they had, all the weapons of power, their spaceships, the lot, the computers, everything gone. They suffered. Their numbers were reduced as well. That's why it didn't get the end game done then. So, I don't know how much time we have left, but let's just go as much as we can. There was a point then. Do you think that these people would just sit around and do nothing about it? Their agenda has become then the moving of mankind forward to the point where the super technological hardware that was destroyed in the War of the Gods could be remanufactured. Some instruments and weapons survived, and these were sequestered in underground chambers and in temple precincts referred to as the Holy of the Holies. To keep everybody else away from it, you know. So they give it this holy bit slant. You know. No, I thought God works through people to people. He doesn't need objects to work through. That already makes me suspicious. I'm not saying that minerals and other things don't have power. Of course they do. But you're talking about God, you know, it's immediate, it's direct, you know. So this is what this was done. They'd build a temple. They'd build what we now know as a temple or a church. And they'd build it, you know, with different chambers or underground chambers. And then they'd say that we're putting in there the holiest of things. All they are is a big building to protect what's left of this technological hardware that we now know as some sacred relic or something like that. You've got to read behind the lines. In Welsh, in the Gaelic tradition, they have a group of people called the Perelt. Now the Perelt is a fraternity of powerful druids who practice metallurgy in the caverns deep beneath the earth, who fashion artifacts like the Cauldron of Power, as well as instruments known as the Gifts of the Gods, which were guns, by the way, weapons. Combs Beaumont, he says, I have said comparatively little in regard to the prehistoric science and weapons, including firearms. although it is manifest that they have played the most vital part in ancient power politics, as we term it in modern days. And the possession of knowledge of metallurgy must have been one of the most urgent yet secret objects on the part of those who desire to rule the ancient world. In analyzing the past, I cannot overstress how vital and important is always the problem of weapons. Yeah, and when we're reading the Bible, we need to remember that the rod and the staff and many other terminologies have to do with actually power weapons. Now, what we have to understand is that the tremendous death toll of all the flora and the fauna and the animals, and if you read my dossier, I have quotes of all the devastating, even from Charles Darwin, and lots of talks about what actually took place on this earth in greater detail. But it was decided by the sons of the serpent and their Adamic entourage, whatever was left on Lemuria, and they were scattered. They realized that these guys, these alien masters that they've been fighting, probably still a lot of them are surviving and are going to be after them. So it was decided at this time that, for safety's sake, that they would spread out in small contingents to the rest of the known planet at that time. And this is what, ladies and gentlemen, you hear about with the coming of the gods, or the coming of culture to the four corners of the earth, and how surprisingly similar the languages, the customs, the dances, and the belief systems are. Of course they're the same. It's the same race taking it there. And then if they went to a certain place and maybe met some other group of people, well, then they would absorb, they'd move in. And this happened in waves as well. But it was done for safety's sake, so that they knew at least if, some of us are killed, or some of us don't survive, some of what we have, knowledge, which came from some of the sons of the serpent, they were still living at that time, it at least will be preserved. Now the other gang, I'd say 50, some people say the Council of 13. Some people believe that only the Dark Brotherhood, only 13 of them remained. I think that's a little light, maybe later on, but there may be about 50 of these beings left. They did the opposite. While the other ones were diversifying, they were condensing. And they condensed at the new equator of the planet Earth, around what we would call now the Middle East, specifically Mesopotamia, Sumeria. And they started creating their empires. They congressed at that place and started building the empires that we know today to be of historical, post-Diluvian time. And isn't it true that from the building of those empires comes what we know as historical time? And aren't all those empires based on bloodshed, murder, repression, and inhuman things? There's a reason. Find out who's the back of it. Isn't it the time from that when we get patriarchy, gender dichotomy, class dichotomy, urban living, which is totally unnecessary, the meat diet, overpopulation, all of the things that plague our societies today come out of a specific time and date. We've got to find out who was behind those empires, why there was so much bloodshed, who was doing what to whom. And in their empire situation, they had an agenda that seemed to us to just be totally random. In Job it says, He increaseth the nations and destroyeth them again. You see, up they go and down they come. He enlargeth the nations and then straighteneth them again. This has been the agenda for 11,000 years. Build nations, build cities, get your empire building again. They have less people, they have less amount of themselves physically, and they got no hardware. They're put back, in their terminology, thousands and thousands of years they put themselves back. Manly Palmer Hall, he says, to repress rebellion is to maintain the status quo, a condition which binds the mortal creature in a state of intellectual or physical slavery. But it is impossible to chain man merely by slaving his body. The mind also must be held, and to accomplish this, fear is the accepted weapon. The common man must fear life, fear death, fear God, fear the devil, and fear mostly the overlords, the keepers of his destiny. So that's what these religious people have been doing. They can't hold a gun to your head. Well, in my country they do that, but they can't do it to the rest of the world. So they do it, remember, through affecting its environment. Through fear. You fear everything. And let's see. The sons of the serpent merged out. I wanted to talk about the monuments again. A lot of times because none of these original beings exist anymore, by the way. Right? The original masters, alien masters, even though they had very long lifespans, none of them are alive today, and neither are any of the original sons of the serpent. All that is left now is people who are their bloodlines, right? Their DNA bloodlines. And when you identify with the alien DNA part of you, this is where you get the inhumanity, the evil, the serial killing, right? All of those things that are pernicious in society, even on a moral, they're just the people we don't like. You meet somebody, you just go, I don't like that person. Something about them I just don't like. And inside ourselves, those aspects of ourselves we don't like. This is the inner Armageddon between the alien and the human DNA that's been at battle for years. You know all the mythologies? Anybody familiar with the mythologies of the world about the twins? The dark-haired twin, the light-haired twin, right? The combat between Cain and Abel, Jesus and Satan, and so on, Arthur and Mordred. You know, this is again a description between the two people. Remember the tree of good and evil? Both sides have this knowledge of the tree of life, but both are an antithesis to each other. Right? Professor Moriarty, Sherlock Holmes. I mean, it's even in fiction, Hamlet, and it goes on and on and on. This dichotomy that we love so much in fiction. But it's coming from a symbol from somewhere. So the people that are alive today are those who have these two strains inside of ourselves, from Homo Atlantis. And when we decide within ourselves which side to go on, we can make that decision inside ourselves, but some have it very strongly. So it might sound like a strange thing to say, but a lot of the rulers of the world, the people who are doing these atrocities in the world, that don't seem to worry about putting, the whole of the earth into slavery to get what they want, they are aligning very strongly. They have a very strong connection to the alien DNA in them when they're born. And then the great masters and the teachers and the healers, they have a stronger human connection opened. You see? The Beethovens, the Mozarts, the Handels, who just are so amazingly genius and create this amazing work in music and art and so on. And then there's the agents of destruction in the world. Obviously they're coming from more from the alien side. How much time do we actually have? Okay, that's pretty good. Now, obviously, we don't have time to go into all the machinations of these characters down through 11,000 years of historical time, do we, right? You can do it on your own. There's Booktree carry amazing publications there on the way that they've done this. But there's something I've been purposely omitting to talk about in regards of all of this. Do you remember when I said that the adversary, these sons of the serpent, the serpent people have been chased into our solar system and they came to our planet, and then the people that were pursuing them took off and left, remember? That's not strictly true. They weren't stupid. And obviously if they've chased these people out of their own planet and into our another solar system, they're really going to make sure that none of these people survive, right? But for some reason they did have to leave relatively quickly. They didn't come to this planet and seek them out. But they probably did do scans of this planet and the solar system to find out if these people are still alive after they destroyed Tiamat. But Tiamat's destruction was creating so much electromagnetic disturbance in the solar system that these beings took off. And if you're into people like Nazim Haramein, the great physicist scientist, he's even talked about the fact that the sun is a black hole by which you do the time travel. Right? So they may have needed to get out when they got out, etc., etc., etc. There may be all sorts of reasons. But they knew that just in case these beings do exist on Earth, that they're there, they erected what is known as an etheric barrier around the Earth, around our Earth. And the magnetic key of that is the moon. And it's still there, by the way. And that is why no man has ever gone beyond the moon. You can go to the moon, but you can't go beyond it. And you never will. They can send a machine out there, but isn't it interested you that they still haven't gone out there as a human form? This is something that's been held from us. You can't. There's a barrier of energy up there around our Earth that's of an esoteric nature. It involves technology, yes, but a technology of an extremely advanced nature that even these aliens probably couldn't crack or get out. So this Earth was in quarantine. If you read C.S. Lewis, he goes into all of this about Earth being quarantined. And the name that he has for our planet is called Fulcandra, the silent planet. It has to be quarantined off from the rest of the 9 planets, because planets are not really material bodies, they're intelligences of a kind. And our planet is under quarantine, so this Armageddon, this inner war, can take place in sequestrament. Okay, just like you quarantine a sick patient. And this ethereal barrier around it is called the Stargate, or the real Stargate. See, the other side give you updates on how well they're doing to get out of it. It's called the movies. And this barrier is well known to the ancient alchemists and so on. And the symbol that has been used is again the serpent. That etheric barrier was known in the Chinese astrology as the dragon's head and the dragon's tail. Anyone who knows about astrology knows the moon's nodes, the nodes of the moon. This has to do with the barrier, and you've always seen the protecting circle of the dragon used in mythology and folktale, right? And many people have dreams I've talked to have connections between the symbol of the moon and the symbol of the dragon, and they don't know why, you know? And then they read my material and go, my God, you just explained it, why I have those dreams. And the Native American Indians, the Zuni and the Hopi, call that barrier the Great Web in the Sky. Anybody ever familiar with that term that the Native American Indians use about a great web in the sky? That web in the sky is there. It's an etheric barrier put there about 50,000 years ago, but the original alien masters who came here didn't know that, right? They didn't know right away that this barrier was put there. They actually found out more in historical times. Because they've been moving us forward to get up to the point where they can rebuild the technology. And if you look at history properly from that just one agenda, ladies and gentlemen, you will find out that almost everything that has been happening from 11,000 years has been doing that. You don't need Gene Roddenberry or some mystic to tell you why is it everybody, even the countercultural pundits and thinkers and activists, have been wondering why is it that our technological scientific ability is so much far in advance of our psychological, emotional, and spiritual development. Because it's been pushed that way. That's why. Because some people are hell-bent on making it that way, who control the empires through the hierarchical system that Jordan Maxwell is the expert on, and other people have also right here in this conference today. You will hear people talking about this, going into these details. But you can put up many questions, but what's the answer? How did this all come about? Why is the eye at the top of the pyramid a reptilian eye? If you actually get a blow-up of the eye at the top of the pyramid of the dollar bill, it's not a human eye. Why are there 13 levels? You know, there's many, many things that a lot of people have not got into with this. Now, as I said, we don't have the time. Oh, yeah, by the way, and the Renaissance, which interestingly means rebirth, is a period where they were all patting themselves on the back. Yeah, lovely artwork and everything. Wonderful, right? But the Renaissance, what the occult agenda behind the Renaissance and the black nobility families of Italy, was that this was the first time that they really were getting it together with the technology. It wasn't anything like what they needed, but it was like a first beginning. They were getting to the point where they realized it was recognizable, you know? And we call it the Renaissance, or they call it the Renaissance, the rebirth. Where finally some of the science and the scientists started to come together. It was looking like it was the beginning, rudimentary beginnings of what they originally had before the technology was lost. Now, we, as I said, don't have time to go through all 11,000 years of what they've been doing. I have to leave that to your own research. But I can draw one picture for you about a specific time that happened in England in the 16th, the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century, but specifically the 17th century, at the time of the Tudor dynasty. A big agenda, an important thing we need to know about concerning this matter took place. And it has to do with this character on the right, who's known as Sir John Dee, and he worked for the British government. And interestingly enough, he was also ambassador to the court of King James, and he would go as an ambassador to Queen Elizabeth I. He would go to different countries. And when he wrote back to her, at the bottom of any intelligence documents he gave, he wrote his signature 007. Because John Dee is the head of MI5. British Secret Service comes from the Tudor dynasty of the 15th century. Ian Fleming, who wrote James Bond, was a member of the Secret Service, and when he retired he thought, I want to write some books, why don't I write about my own organization? So he did, and what you're reading there, and more importantly, the movies. Those James Bond movies, if you know how to watch those, they're telling you amazing stories. I mean, obviously you've got to wade through all the phallocratic, macho nonsense, but if you can manage to sit through that stuff, you're going to see something fascinating in those stories. I love them. Notice MI5's logo. Look at the pyramid and the eye at the top. See that? Well, John Dee was a great occultist, sacred geometrist, and court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth, and black magician, and he worked for this woman, who is called Elizabeth Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII. The original, she who must be obeyed. But her name in history is interesting, I would say. Right? She was known as the Virgin Queen, and it's not because she couldn't get a man. This is about something else. They've, told us lies in history, but Virgin Queen, remember how the offspring of one of the sides would procreate? Think about it. And John Dee was a Rosicrucian, which is a secret society of Freemasons operating in the world, and that is why in all government buildings, as Jordan Maxwell and people have pointed out, you have the Rose Garden and the symbol of the rose. In every capital city of the world, you have the Rose Garden, and the Bohemian Society and all these groups use the symbol of the rose, the Tudor rose. So John Dee was the man around the time when they actually discovered that there's a barrier up there, because by that time they had telescopes and they maybe had some primitive flying ships. I mean, we've heard about the flying ships for thousands of years, right, and the stuff I've told you about already. But they may have made some primitive crafts and tried to leave the planet and couldn't do it. So it was around about that time, the 13th, 14th, 15th century, that these technocrats realized, hey, we got a serious problem here. We've just spent almost 11,000 years trying to build up the hardware to get out of this planet, and now, no matter what we build, we can't get out because there's a blinking Stargate up there. So they were in turmoil, and that is one of the reasons why those periods of history are so important, not for the reasons they've been telling you in history school. They really were in a dilemma. They were imprisoned in this planet. Remember in the book of Revelation it says, and God will chain the beast to the pit for 1,000 years? Right? Satan being chained to a pit. They realized they couldn't get out. So John Dee, cut a long story short, said, well, we need another approach. We'll not stop with the development of the hardware, keep that going, but we're going to need an altogether different approach. And he contacted his patrons, the Queen of England and her coterie, these original Illuminati types, and he said, what we need to do is go to a completely higher form of intelligence. Not extraterrestrial, but pan-dimensional. They may be able to help us with this. This is not the first time that such a portal has been opened on our Earth, and it wasn't the last. John Dee contacted some beings that C.S. Lewis refers to as the macrobes. He says that under our level of perception, we have the microbes. A couple of hundred years ago, if you had talked to anybody about microbes, microbial life, bacteria, they'd have laughed at you. They'd have thought you were insane and probably locked you up if you described that. Then we invented the telescope, and now it's common knowledge, right? A whole universe of life forms, right? Beneath our perception of vision. Well, C.S. Lewis says there is another level above us, on the next level up almost, which is the same. You can't have a physical instrument so much to deal with it. The instrument of noticing that and knowing that is the human intuition. Or shall we say the human imagination. But John Dee, being an occultist and a magician of very great power, opened a portal in England in the 14th century. The 15th century was opened in England. And he contacted beings of a higher grade of intelligence. This thing is a whole study in itself, to do with occultism and what have you. And he contacted these macrobes, and these macrobes actually don't like being pestered by inferior types like him. And we can't say they're good or they're bad, you know, that those terms ain't going to work with this. But the long story short, as his mind is nearly frazzling with their interaction, they actually did tell him, oh yeah, what's your problem? And they said, oh yeah, we have no problem with that, we can help you with that, we can, you know, fix that. And he goes, well then, let's do it. But the only trouble was that in order to do it, the information that they had to pour through his consciousness, he very quickly realized would take literally thousands of years to manifest in physical time. When the information started transmitting through his work, and his work was called Enochian magic, for those who happen to be into that, you know when you see all those lovely pictures and quaint images of magicians in circles and all these symbols around and the 5-pointed pentagram and all that stuff, have you ever noticed how many of those symbols are actually planetary symbols for the start? I mean, we're talking occultism, yet they're mostly symbols of the planets. Because that also is some subject that's been put before us totally erroneously. I go into that in the book, about what that really is all about and why planetary symbols are used so often. So when he started translating into his Enochian, those quaint things you see in museums, all that information that was pouring down, it was too big for his consciousness and Edward Kelly and some other people that he worked with. So he had to get all his counterparts in Europe to get on the ball with this. So all these Illuminati families and black nobility intelligence people, you know, they were all working simultaneously at the same time. But then obviously history would notice this, wouldn't it? That all of these families start getting into what looks like the occult. So they sold that back to us as a period in history when suddenly there was a renaissance of esoteric knowledge in the world and everybody was into it. As if it's sort of something like a vogue thing, you know? And I'm not saying things like that don't happen. But all over the planet, all these rich families and rich people start getting into the occult. They've got to put it before us in this quaint way, just like they put swashbuckling movies of Errol Flynn in front of you, you know, to tell you something. The real story behind that is that these scholars were all working independently on this vast amount of knowledge which was pouring in day and night through the consciousness of the psychics of the world who worked for these royal families. Cornelius Agrippa and all of these other people were doing it, writing it down. And then later on it was discovered that it's so much information, what they're telling us, and it's also very hard to practicalize, and also they don't even know what it is, because it was a very advanced science, way beyond what this guy could translate. So they had to hand all of these dossiers out. And then later it was realized that having each of these intellectual geniuses working in their own little garrets up in the Bavarian hills is not good enough. We're going to have to, this knowledge is getting so much now, you have to bring it together into places where the scholars can come. We call those places universities. universe cities, cities of the universe, or colleges where you collage information. You see, it wasn't good enough to have everybody doing their own research. The knowledge was getting so immense, they brought it into central places. It's not for you, me, and Grandma to go and get educated and get a degree. They don't care about us. They never did. Now you can do it. They've offered us the privilege, thank God. But my father and your forefathers didn't even know that. Just 50 years ago, didn't even have the privilege of education. So, think about that. We have the privilege. We get a little bit, arrogant about it. Yeah. Very, very short time ago in your own families, that was not what was happening. Your fathers were sweating on the fields, wondering what life is all about and why they are going through the lives that they have been going through. We owe it to them. If you're not a humanitarian, that's perfectly all right. If you don't care about humanity, that doesn't bother me. But you have your own family line then, your own tradition, your own private lineage of your forefathers, your mothers and your fathers, your grandfathers who slaved on this planet under these people. You owe it to them to find out the answers and do something. You should be doing it for humanity. But even if that one doesn't, trigger you, I'm assuming it does, everyone who's in this particular venue. But even if it wouldn't, I tell people all the time, if it doesn't hit you on that level, I could get plenty of other reasons why you should do this and fight this fight. The thing is that this knowledge was pouring in thick and fast, so they eventually created the universities. And if you don't believe this, just study the architecture of the universities of the world. Go there and look at the symbols they use in those places, and how they're divided and sequestered, and the robes and the clothes that the scholars wear and everything. And you'll find it's occult. Part of the information that was transmitted to these people from the macrobes was that in order to even begin to build what you need, you're going to have to basically use the entire planet's mineral resources to get the very physical wealth, to pay the people, to do whatever. It's like running a business, right? Anybody here is a business owner, they know what I'm talking about. Well, this is a business that incorporated building super technologies. So is it not from the 14th and 15th century that we have the rise of the British Empire? This tiny little country that stretches its tentacles out to the rest of the world? Isn't it from that time that we have the universities of the world rising? Isn't it from that time we have the stock exchange rising? Isn't it that time we have the Industrial Revolution's beginnings? The agricultural revolution, right? Think of just how many things that we now take for granted that came out of that particular time. Wasn't it the time of the new science of Francis Bacon and Newton and Copernicus and Kepler? All looks very divided, doesn't it? Well, because it's divided, because we're learning it from the universities who have been put together by them in the first place, who know how to disseminate the knowledge so that you won't see the overall pattern. But the few at the top of the pyramid know what is really going on. These things don't just arise by themselves. Just study those periods themselves, please. If you go even on a trip to England, on a holiday, and you go through those lovely estates, those beautiful estates of the landed gentry, just ask, when is the architecture? Ask the guides, when do these get built? 90% of the stately homes in England were all built around the 16th century. Something happened in that time of England that we now inherit, which we have as modern times. Before that, the kings were shivering in their castles. They didn't even have glass for the windows. And yet suddenly something happens. So the British Empire arose, and they sent out the pirates. They sent out their emissaries from the Hudson Bay Company and the East India Company to the four corners of the world to enslave the world, to get the mineral resources, to get the slavery, to get the gold, you see, to bring it back for one agenda orchestrated by just a very few people of the Tudor dynasty. America's destiny is very much involved in this. Through the Hudson Bay Company and the Russell Trust, this country was also taken over by the pirates. Pirates, the word pirates is from pyrate, fire. The fire ones, the Illuminati, the ones who have the fire. Right? We've been watching too much Errol Flynn, and they put before us all this romantic stuff. Find out who these characters were and what they were up to. Just study the pirates alone. Just study the main pirates and their biographies, those characters. It's a fascinating story will unfold that you won't be able to explain unless you have these answers. Some of these pirate leaders had tremendous magical powers. They were also extremely brutal and ruthless. Now, the macrobes, they don't do nothing for free. First of all, they told John Dee and his cohorts that to get the key to the Stargate, you need to do two things. The first thing you need to do has to be in two parts. The first thing you need to do is to find out how to make matter from energy. I'm cutting a long story short. It took them hundreds of years just to read through this stuff. But they said, you're too stupid to even know how to do that. So we have to teach you the opposite first, which is how to release energy from matter. That's not what you're going to do, but that's how you have to learn. And to do that, it's going to take you 500 years. Remember when Oppenheimer split the bomb? Split the atom? That was when they patted themselves on the back, because phase one was accomplished. The pupils had learned now how to release energy from matter that day. Remember, even people said, my God, they could have destroyed this whole arm of the universe. Well, they don't care, because they have to prove to their masters now, right, that they've learned phase one. That's actually not what they have to learn. They have to learn the opposite. That they had to learn phase one of how to release energy from matter. That was done. Now they're doing the opposite. Now, slowly, they're beginning to learn how to create matter from energy, which is what the macros told them is one of the keys to get out of the Stargate. MIT, SRI, NEC Corporation, and also Sun Corporation are just fronts for that. That's all they are. They're just fronts for that particular agenda. The second key involved, the macrobes told them, involves the element known as silicon. You're talking to John Dee in the 14th century. He's like, no, what anything is this? What? Right? So they're telling him this stuff, and they said the second key has to do with silicon. What you're calling, we're calling the Silicon Revolution, is the end game that is now being played out, which is why you see these symbols coming from the ancient world, on these logos. But the macrobes don't do anything for nothing. So John Dee goes, well, what do you want in return for your knowledge? And they said, we want blood. Because just like any entity, any vampire, right? Blood is energy. And if you study the occult, you'll realize that blood is a form of energy. And blood happens to be the second most commonest word in the Bible after God. So John Dee goes, oh, how much do you want and when do you want it? No worries. Oh yeah, tell when and where. So the macrobe said, well, we want sacrifices. Ladies and gentlemen, is it not also since that time of the 16th century that the wars, not battles between two maniac kings with a couple of hundred knights, but I'm talking about the wars, begin? Not only the ships and the trade routes and the debauchery, Africa, what these people have done to just that continent alone? We don't have to go there. Think about what they've done in America. But isn't it also that time that the great wars begin? Have you ever questioned why it is that all the soldiers always wear occult symbols? Because in order to have a ritual death, even if you just study your common garden black magician who's going to kill a cat, right? They have to draw the right circle, do it under the right constellations, do it under the right timing, right? Think of a mass on a huge level that has to send up energy to these beings. It can't be done, it doesn't qualify as a ritual killing unless certain things are done properly. So the location is very important, and the timing is also very important. So they said the ritual centers, our cities are actually, that's what they are, they're ritual centers for that. Do you know that there's 23 zodiacs in Washington, D.C., sequestered into the architecture there? That's more than any single place on the planet. In this book that was recently done, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, this author goes into that, into the memoirs of the Library of Congress of all the founding fathers to describe. He doesn't know what he's looking at, but at least he presents the information of why these centers exist. Now, because of time, we do not have the time to have all of the quotes from his book that I have that are so beautiful. They're in my book for you, but we don't have time to just do them in this moment. Let me skip forward. How long we got? Yeah, see? So let's just try and get somewhere here. We're close to the end anyway, but I'll skip through a lot of stuff here. Unfortunately, we don't have that time. So when you see our cities, these ritual cities, please realize that the geometry that's been proven now to be involved in them, through that book and previously through the work of George Maxwell and others, that these cities are designed specifically for reasons. And those monuments and obelisks that you see, they're all for reasons. To enhance grid energy, to be sacrificial sites. Lady Diana Spencer was killed not far from this Eiffel Tower, right? At the junction of 3 roads, at the 13th pillar, etc., etc., etc. 100 years, almost to the day when Jack the Ripper killed his first victim on the 31st of August. A virgin. Right? Lady Diana Spencer represents the virgin, right? In occult terms. The whores that Jack the Ripper killed represent in esoteric terms a willing victim or a sacrificial victim. The 31st of January is when the sign of the Virgin, the Virgo constellation, goes into the underworld. On that day. The Virgin constellation of Virgo descends into the underworld. They take out the Virgin then. I teach this extensively, all of these rituals and what they get up to. They're not going to use solar astrology, because then the average astrologer would get onto this. They use other kinds of astrology that are more esoteric. And I specialize in that and go into this whole ball game about how geometry and sacred geometry is used in the designs of cities, and how assassinations of John F. Kennedy and other groups, other people, are entirely based on this. And it's something we're living in them, we might as well know about it. It's happening in our backyard. And how the American designs of cities are like a silicon chip. Now remember we talked about the ancient monuments? What they were built for? When these people went, when the serpent race went to different parts of the world, they had long lifespans, these sons of the serpent. But when they would actually die, their fellows, who remained, in order to commemorate the amazing life of this person, who's part alien, who'd come from another star system, who had enlightened the world, who brought civilization, healing, they could mend bones, they enlightened the Adamic race, who gave them freedom, who literally were our gods. When one of these people would die, they would erect, not over them, not as tombs, but they would build in sacred geometry with using harmonics, a edifice as a cenotaph, not a tomb, a cenotaph, there's a difference, right? To commemorate the fall of that being. And that's what those tombs are, and what happens when you're there. Right, when you go to those places and feel something, you're connecting with something. Remember all those ritual murders and deaths that happened in the Aztecs and the Druids, how suddenly all these wonderful cultures went to wreck and ruin and went into sacrifice and death and bloodshed? That was to change this when the other side came back in power again. But just know for now that these serpent people had a habit of doing that. And they would try to make the harmonics and the sacred geometry embody some aspect of that particular hero that died. Some particular beloved, means that this person communicated. They try to do it in stone to make that person live. Today that's what we do when we raise a gravestone to a dead loved one. We don't realize we're doing that now, but that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to encompass something of that person's life. Now the dark aliens do it too. When one of their beings died, they would bury this person and they would build something over it. And in fact, when one of them characters would die, wherever their bones were buried, that has become historically a place of unbelievable unrest in the world. And when I looked into this occult paradigm, I found out that two places where two of these dark masters are buried, one is Palestine and the other is Northern Ireland. So I've been working on, at some point getting some sort of exorcism done where we can remove these remains. It's not going to be easy because they're protected and the dark ones know where they are and worship those places and altar. But yeah, the aura of the negativity that comes from these people's bodies, it causes conflict, which they suck off and suck off and suck off. Now, interesting too, because the White Brotherhood, where they're buried, is always feelings of great peace and protection, So when you're talking about earth changes, some people are fanatical about earth changes and where to go, if there's going to be earth changes. I personally don't buy into that, and I'm not of that disposition, but I have respect for those who do. Well, one of the things is these monuments, their very positioning is of interest because they have protection around them. One moment. Come to the final part here. So Washington, D.C. is one of the cities that is entirely based on this kind of geometry, and we need to realize it. And in Washington, D.C., you have very patently occult symbols. Here's George Washington in a strange pose, which actually represents the god of the Templars, Baphomet. There's nothing evil about this symbol in itself, I'm not saying that, but just the fact that it is occult, and one of your presidents happens to be stylized exactly as that, should tell us something. Then, of course, what we're more familiar with is that the symbols of the Nazis, for instance, are Druidic symbols. Right? Jordan Maxwell has gone into this about the symbols of the Malta cross and the oak leaves. Isn't it interesting that the Oval Office has an oak leaf motif? Hasn't the cavalry wore the oak acorns on their hats, your American cavalry? how the Russian on their lapels, the Russian generals wear the oak leaves, the French around their hats, so the gendarmes wear the oak leaves. I mean, wait a minute, half these people were meant to be enemies at different times. How come they're wearing all the same symbols? Yeah, they look enemies on paper. That's about it. The skull and bones, used by the pirates, used by the Yale University people, right? The swastika. We don't have time to go into all this now, obviously, but... and here is the symbol of your Smithsonian Institute, a black sun. And they've also been telling us, by the way, about the two ways that they control the world. The cross and the crown, which is the symbol of the Knights Templar, are the two means by which they've controlled the world. Religion and monarchy. Right? Two forms of mind control that have done the job. Again, I apologize. We have a lot to go into and we don't have the time. Yeah, I'd love it. Oh, here's an interesting one here. Here's the serpent itself, right? And look beside it is the swastika. Remember I made an anecdote earlier on about how the swastika was a serpent? This comes from the Picts of ancient Scotland, using the swastika, the Malta cross, and the serpents. You know why? Anunnaki, as I said, was a bad translation. The word Nazi, one of the 8 children of the mother goddess Ninharsag, right, who's Sumerian goddess of the Anunnaki, Nazi was her son, one of the 8 children. 8 children. See that? The children, one of the children of an Anunnaki member was called Nazi, or Nazi. Nazareth was the hometown of Jesus Christ, son of a virgin. Nazareth. Because Naza meant Nagar, it comes from Nagar, or the serpent. Priests. Now we have been told all along what's going on. When they're talking about nuclear war, atomic war, Cold War, and Star Wars, those very terms tell you that they're not dropping bombs on you from space. They're working inside. Nuclear and atomic imply something. Cold implies something. We're looking for reds under the beds and, atom bombs to drop from the sky, and all the time they're working on us inwardly, atomically, genetically. The whole thing's been a genetic war. Because remember, part of the journey to build the hardware is not just to get out of the planet. What also did they lose? Was the ability to do gene research. Does that ring any bells? What's been coming of vogue very recently? The very same thing. In the Bay Area, California, right here, most of the companies are not silicon-based. They are genetic and orientated. Many of you work there, you know this. 3/4 of them are gene-orientated. And then you have satellites, and then you have silicon. So they're doing it, and they've been telling us all along in the terminology. The rituals of blood. I really specialize in this a lot. It's a fascinating subject in itself. But please realize that the Holocaust, do you know the word Holocaust in Yiddish actually means burned sacrifice? Right? John F. Kennedy, Guyana, Waco, Heaven's Gate, Columbine, Lady Diana Spencer, these are all specific rituals of blood. Yeah, same thing. Now this maniac, who's under mind control, yeah, he is operating from the Saturnian cult point of view. Remember how all the victims had Nike clothes on and Nike shoes? Nike, they're leaving you symbols. They play with us all the time. That was a ritual death done at a specific time. I mean, we know about the comet, but everyone was wondering, what about the comet? Nobody made the connection. It's like the comet represents a timing of something. Because timing in ritual death is very important. Everybody's wondering about the comet. Nobody was wondering about the timing. Here is the Nike tick, which actually represents the ring of Saturn. See that? That's the planet Saturn and its ring. All the victims wearing black attire. Black is the symbol of Saturn. Ask any astrologer, what is the symbol of the color of Capricorn and Saturn? It's black. The Nike logo is Saturn. All the victims were castrated. Read your mythology. What does Saturn do? He is the castrator of his father, right, the god. And the name Heaven's Gate. In astrology, there are 2 gates of the zodiac, Cancer and Capricorn. Capricorn was called the gate of passing. Cancer is the gate of the coming in of the soul. Gate of Capricorn is the passing out. Look at that. A ritual sacrifice called Heaven's Gate. The souls are literally left to go through the Heaven's Gate, out of the zodiac, out of time, out of the world. Yes. Very interesting. And that's only a small part of the symbolism that they surround on this part of these kinds of things. Here is an interesting symbol of a summit meeting. I think it's the G7. You see the table? What's in the middle of it? There's Clinton and Blair and Mitterrand, right? And there you have the circle. Did you know that this was the original symbol that was going to be put on the dollar bill? Amaraka already means the land of the serpents, but this was the symbol that was going to be put on your dollar bill. Look at the surrounding. It wasn't put on. It was a little obvious. Now, it happens to be a fact that all of the presidents that were ever elected, it's in my book there, have direct blood ties to the kings of England, to specific monarchs. Everybody familiar with that? If you're not, you better find out. That every president who's been elected, and the ones who have not been elected, who lost, have no blood ties, or lesser blood ties. Every president of America, see, this is meant to be a constitutional country? That's a laugh. But anyway, that's the point, is that they all have direct blood ties to British monarchs and to black nobility families. And the Sumerians state that the first human kings on earth were the offspring of custodial rulers who mated with the human women. Those matings entitled the half-human offspring to become the early monarchs of the earth. Get this book, Gods of Eden. I think Ted might be carrying it. The Sumerians state that the first human kings were the offspring of the monarchs of the earth, of the custodial rulers. He's telling you everything in that 5 lines, what we've just been talking about today. The laying out of the red carpet. I thought that was just for royal families. Clinton walks on one. Bush walks on one. Reagan walked on the red carpet, cutting the red tape, right? Getting through all the red. I'm in the red, you know, when you're in the red. What is this bit about the red? And then the walking on the red carpet signifies the bloodline. That's why they roll a carpet out for the Queen of England, to say that she is of the royal bloodline. But your presidents are walking on it. That's symbolism for something. They're telling you we're the bloodline. We're not independently elected. We work for the same establishment. We walk on the red carpet. Thomas More, 15th century, the time we're talking about, everywhere. He was the man who was executed. He wrote the book Utopia. You know the book Utopia? You studied in school. He wrote this, and listen what he said. Everywhere do I perceive a certain conspiracy of rich men seeking their own advantage under the name and pretext of the Commonwealth. It's so old, it's new. Well, let's try. I'd love to get through this. To give you an idea of the kind of characters that have been ruling us. The 14th century Plantagenet Richard II, one of the most unpredictable of the English kings, after an unsuccessful peasants' revolt, this is familiar to anyone who studied British history, declared to his Saxon underlings, God omnipotent is mustering in his clouds on our behalf armies of pestilence, that they shall strike your children yet unborn. Look at that line. They will strike your children yet unborn and unbegot, that lift your vassal hands against my head and threat the glory of my precious crown. You wretches, detestable on land or sea, you will seek equality with lords and are unworthy to live. Give this message to your colleagues. Rustics you were, and rustics you are still. You will remain in bondage, not as before, but incomparably harsher. For as long as we live, we will strive to suppress you, and your misery will be an example for posterity. However, we will spare your lives if you remain faithful. So choose now which course you want to follow. These are just a small example of the people that have been ruling this world. And their cohorts, like this character, the philosopher Malthus, who advocated the eradication of the lower elements of society. He proposed wars, epidemics, and famines, to thin out the herd. He especially wanted to control the sexual reproduction of the underclasses. Darwin embraced these ideas. Herbert Spencer. While Darwin got the credit, the leading proponent of this chilling racial evolutionary theory was Herbert Spencer, whose ideas were based on race. Only one race is capable of ascending to the highest level of the evolutionary spiral, the others will be left behind. We all think he's talking about some Aryans or something like that. Because remember, to cover the racial, remember we're talking about the serpent race? To cover that up, that you want to actually find out what they're really talking about, they've done this number with the whole Aryan Anglo-Saxon, they're the superior race bit, which holds no water and is not true. Sure, they're wonderful people, very cultured and all of that, but so are a lot of others. That's another whole smoke screen to make sure you never find out what race they really mean, or they're really talking about. The checkerboard, and how the administrators of the Masons will use the checkerboard, like your police. And here's the symbol from Abbey Road, the Beatles, walking on the checkerboard. Don't have time to go into why that was. And some people have asked me, how come it is, that we're so behind in this game? How come, we are, not knowing any of this? And I use this anecdote of a game of chess. If I bring up chess master up here and ask him, what are the principles by which I can become a master of the game of chess, he'll say these 4 things. He'll say that you need a sense of patience. Now, if you don't have patience, don't even try to begin the game to learn it. He'll say you need a sense of timing. If you don't have a sense of timing, don't open the book. You have to have knowledge of your opponent, right? And then the 4th one that they'll tell you is that you need to have the willingness to make any and all sacrifices. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why are the dark side winning the game? It's because they've got infinite patience. They've been working on one thing for 50,000 years. I call that patience. They got a brilliant sense of timing because they know all about the astrology and the divination that we've forgot, that our agricultural ancestors all knew about. Well, we're with the Julian calendar and we're not interested in any of that stuff anymore. We're slaves of the watch, but we don't know about the higher time to rule our own lives by it. They have amazing knowledge of you, right? They have intense knowledge of us, their enemies. And the 4th one is the clincher, isn't it? Because they're willing to make any and all sacrifices when and wherever they need to do it. It's as simple as that. And they are the game players. They even use that symbol in their own lodges. Now, I'm not saying that the average Freemason is involved in this. Of course not. We're talking about an extremely elite group that has permeated and infiltrated these groups in the 17th century. Now, Freemasonry uses the symbol of the G in the center. See that? Well, G is often and usually in ancient times depicted like this. What does that look like? Yeah. So people have gone into what does the G in Freemasonry mean? One of its more esoteric meanings is to do with this. And these are the symbols of technology. People who have not understood this, the rule and the compass, they do represent everything that a normal Freemason will tell you. I'm not saying that. But they are the symbols of technology, which is what the agenda was, and inside it is the serpent symbol. Don't believe me? Look how they're using it again in just a simple logo. What is this for? Look what the title is at the bottom. Everybody see that? Yeah. Simply telling us things that we just pass by and not think of. Recognize that? The serpent. Through money. Remember we said we came together to get the resources of the world so they could get on with their agenda? And that wave symbol, that wave, or that serpent-like symbol, is found in many, many things. You've seen this logo many times. What does this look like? What does this word say? Say it out loud, somebody. If you add the phoneme S-E-R on the beginning of that, what do you get? Because Pentium doesn't mean anything in English, does it? It's Latin for the 5 room. Yeah, the room of the 5, or the level of the 5th. Pentagrams are very important. It's because it has to do with the pentagon. The pentagon is the 5th shaped room. So Pentium and Microsoft are funded by the Pentagon, who are funded by whatever behind that. But the word Pentium has a... You put on the S-E-R on the front of that, and that will tell you what's going on. Gateway. Remember we talked about the gateway? Intel inside. Have you ever noticed how many of their corporate logos is a door, a little bit ajar? How many times you notice the portal? Even the Pentium 2 logo looked like a doorway. They always use a symbol of a doorway to get out of something. Check into the logos. They're very interesting. There's one point here that the British royal family used the Malta cross and the dove. And everyone goes, oh, the dove. You know, symbol of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. No, it isn't. The word in Latin or Spanish for dove is columb, right? From which we get Columbia. So America was called Columbia, founded by Christopher Columbus, District of Columbia, Columbia Records, Columbia Pictures, Columbia. Isn't it interesting that all your drugs come from Columbia, South America? Yeah, you know, if you find out who's running Columbia and who named it, you'll know why they're sending the drugs from there. British Columbia and Columbus. Well, there was a magician who was working for this black nobility called Giuseppe Balsamo, known more poetically as Count Cagliostro. He had, in Freemasonry, a rite that he called Cagliostro's Egyptian rite, which involved a virginal boy or girl as an oracle or even priest for channeling information. These virgins were known in Masonic circles as the Columns. Remember in 1999, the massacre at Columbine High School? Involving what? Children. Virgins. There's a reason that this is a rite, a sacrificial rite. When soldiers are going to go and die, it's no good just to have them dress up and kill each other. They've got to be wearing stars, 5-pointed stars, oak leaves, Malta crosses. as a sign to the macrobes, these are your marked ones. Then they'll send them to a field or a certain place. You know those fields in France where people died? In Crimea? Check out where they are on the meridians. Find out, go into Richard Hoagland's website. Find out all of this stuff about the exact positioning of certain things. Duke of Brunswick, who was the head of the Freemasonic order in 17th century, stood up to the whole world Freemasonry and said these words: I have been convinced that we as an order have come under the power of some very evil occult order, profoundly versed in science, both occult and otherwise, though not infallible, their methods being black magic, that is to say, now look at this, electromagnetic power, hypnotism and powerful suggestion. We are convinced that this order is being controlled by some sun order, after the nature of the Illuminati, if not by that order itself. There's Freemasons who don't even know about this. Quote, when he asked for the disbanding of the entire order of Freemasonry in the 17th century because he knew that the evil archy had got inside. George Washington called pretty much for the same thing over here. Or warned. Jefferson warned. Another black magician, Bertrand Russell. You should check into who the Russell family were. Hitherto in this regard, wars, he says, have been disappointing. We need to bring into being another black plague. H.G. Wells, investigations into the beginning of religion have accumulated steadily throughout the past half-century, but it is only by great efforts of censorship, by sectarian education of an elaborately protected sort, that ignorance about them is maintained. Okay, so when people say, oh, this couldn't all be happening, you know, by any kind of conspiracy, he's saying it is, and it takes a lot of elaboration to actually disguise the knowledge. And another one of your Americans, a brilliant man, Anthony Sutton, of Stanford University. Right. He said in his book, Trilaterals Over America, their interests are global, and much as they may protest, we see no difference between trilateral globalism and, for example, the British and French imperialism of the 19th century, or for that matter, the Holy Roman Empire. Well, he's absolutely right, because they're not different. They don't. That's why they use the laurel leaves from ancient Rome. That's why they say the eagle has landed on the moon, because the eagle is the symbol of Vatican. Vatican is not the same thing as Catholicism. There's two different things. It's a fact that the Vatican own all your state buildings. The White House rent goes to the Vatican. All the solar telescopes in the world, and including the observatories of outer space, belong to Vatican. Before any astronomer can pass information to the world, it goes by Vatican intelligence first. Especially solar observations. What would that be all about? In order to get out of the Stargate, they've been trying everything conceivable. Everything you can think of. But then, you know, they've been using this and that. And, you know, it's like a burglar. You have this etheric barrier. What does a burglar do when he comes to a wire fence? He puts in a dummy wire, doesn't he? He clips on a dummy wire and then he cuts the middle wire and leaves a gate to get through, the Stargate, right? That's what they want to do, but you can't do that with a pair of pliers up there. You have to do it with energy. So they've been trying to do it with laser energy, which they mount on the satellites. The first satellites went up so they could do that. So they could beam energies, you know, of a laser power onto the Stargate to try and open a gate. But they don't know the calibration. That's what Stargate's all about, where they can't find the 13th blah, 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 right? They're telling you, they're giving you updates. They can't get through. So they then created, recently, through the work of Nikola Tesla, a very, very powerful form of microwave technology. They've been trying it stronger and stronger all the time. It's called HARP. It was invented here by Tesla. They worked on it in Alaska, but the ultimate goal of HARP was to mount it on the satellites to try and beam its way through. They've been doing it for a lot longer, this power, this microwave technology, and the problem was that they were doing it for so long that they superheated the atmosphere and created what we know as the ozone layer. The ozone layer is not created by your CFCs. Unfortunately, it's not. It's created by this endless amount of beaming that they do of these microwaves up there that has depleted the ozone layer. That's why they don't care. They knew it was happening, but they're thinking they're getting out. So when you think you're getting out, you go mad, don't you? And then when they seen it happening, they had to give an excuse. So they went into the environmental world where there is a problem with CFCs, and they said, let's do that. Let's tell them it's the McDonald's cartons. Anything, they'll believe it. And they did. The combined military expenditures of all the world's governments in 1987 alone were so large that all the social programs of the United Nations could be financed for 300 years.
Does everybody get this? So we're talking about poverty here, and it can never change, and what are we going to do? Well, what we're going to do is stop these people from doing what they're doing. First, the combined military expenditures in 1 year alone could find all the social programs that the United Nations has, all of them, for 300 years. So I just want to say thank you for this presentation. Our planet has been visited in the past time. When I describe these aliens coming into our planet, right, into this planet, what does that sound like? When something from an alien source invades, right, an organism, what would that sound like to you? A viral infection. So people ask me, what are we going to do about it? Wave placards, shoot bows and arrows at them? Not going to work. They have invaded us, and it is exactly like that. It is exactly the same paradigm. What does the holistic doctor tell you to do when you're invaded by a virus? What is the terms that they use? To strengthen the immune system. The earth is intelligent. The earth knows what to do. The earth is living. The earth doesn't want this pestilence on itself. We're running around trying to fight them, in the normal way. It's not going to work. The earth is intelligent and living, and it knows what to get off of itself when it gets off it, and do it in the right way. But we have to strengthen its immune system, and we've lost the methodology of doing it. Each and every human being is a white blood corpuscle, a lymphocyte on the face of the earth. But if you're not doing your own rituals, if we've lost our traditional roots, and don't know about ritual, although some people gladly are getting back into that and deeply researching this, those rituals are not just, because I want to go to God and I'm, bored with my life. Every ritual that you do, no matter what it is, you must have in your mind that that ritual also involves the earth plane on which you live. Every ritual you do has no meaning unless you think that way. The dragon dances and the ghost dances of the Native American Indians, what do you think that was all about? This is going to give you some line. You know what that was all about? All the shamans of the world, when they do their rituals, they're doing that. Their work, harmonically through dances, is to strengthen the immune system of the earth. They become that. They become emissaries of the earth, which is why they wear animal headdresses. But they've been all murdered. That's why the indigenous people have been slaughtered wherever they've gone, because the Dark Brotherhood, when the immune system of the earth starts to strengthen, they feel it bad, like a virus would, like a parasite. So that was why in the 17th century, exactly the same period I'm talking about, there was an all-out agenda that when you come across the indigenous people, you annihilate them. First of all, they're probably descendants of the sons of the serpent, who you hate anyway. And secondly, they're doing this kind of magical work. So get rid of them. So the Druids were destroyed, the Indians were destroyed, the Aboriginals were destroyed. Today it's happening as well. They can't have them around because they know. So few of them are left. So many of these rituals have been lost. You see, that we don't know what to do anymore. So each of us must research this to find out that even in your thoughts, your connection to the earth itself, and your own private rituals must be tied in some way, in a ritual way, to discover that. And I'll leave you with this, because they have been telling us. In the movie Highlander, from the dawn of time we came, moving silently down through the centuries, living many secret lives. No one has ever known that we were among you. Until now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, your patience, and your tolerance.